Quick disclaimer, the character, the footage of which you're going to be seeing is very scuffed. I had to assemble it from literally nothing because I have a habit of selling and disassembling my characters, so all the gear was lost except for the axe. So my damage is way lower, my tankiness is a bit lower, and in general it feels way wonkier, both because I don't have like vulnerability and I don't have Warcry speed because of Urgent Order is low level and the Warcry cooldown is bad, and I'm lacking attack speed because my clusters are not there. A lot of stuff missing, so don't judge too hard. I'm also on like 32 hours with no sleep, so don't judge me too harsh for the fortress fight. I swear it looked way worse than I can actually play. I'm not a fraud. Yo, I'm here. So a few days ago, we got the patch notes, we got the reveal, we got most of the news. There's a few changes to patch notes coming with like changes to the spells and some code skills, but we don't care about that. We're only playing Glad. So I kind of have like an introduction to the list of the things I'll go over in this video. So I'm gonna begin with talking about like league starter plans that I want to share with you. They're gonna be at the very end because it's likely that not all of you are interested in that. So there are gonna be time codes and description on the bar. So if you're here for the league starter plan, it's gonna be there. Just know that it does not have an end game setup because I'm not sure that I will get there. And if I do get there, how I will make it because of the relic cache changes. That out of the way, I would want to talk about a few other things, which is first, direct and indirect changes to bleed. There haven't been much, but I would still like to discuss them and what it can imply for the builds. A quick bleed build tier list. I used tier list maker and I made like my own tier list with like all the bleed builds I think are actually somewhat viable and playable. Of course, there's some other playable ones which are very funky that I think are still playable, but are way worse than a alternative art type of build that is present in the tier list. Then the next one is what builds to league start and what not to league start when it comes to bleed, because obviously all of them are technically league startable, but some will be a way more miserable experience than others. And just general thoughts on the direction in which bleed is moving, because I don't think I've made a video discussing the changes of 325 and their applications, how they developed. And I haven't really discussed my wishes for the direction where it would move. I should have probably made it earlier so that maybe somehow through some insane chain reaction it could have reached GG, but it is what it is. It'll just be like it is. Like, my fault, not my fault, doesn't matter. I was just lazy. It is what it is. We take it and move on. So starting with the direct and indirect changes to Bleed itself. So I have patch notes open here. Like the first thing, of course, when I looked up, it was like Gladiator, it was Bleed, it was all that. So obviously the first thing that I saw was Blade Trap of Laceration. When I POB'd it, when it came out, it was really, really bad because even if you play Glad, it's very hard to actually make it work because it doesn't support two-handed weapons, unlike the Greatswords one. Because if it supported like two-handed axes, it'd be way easier to make it work. But at the same time, the numbers are just not it. Like even the changed ones, even the 50% like faster, it's still not it, even with Crimson Dance. I just cannot see how would you make like traps actually have more damage than normal skills. Like, what is the advantage, right? You can imagine traps are clunky, and how do you make them work with enough damage? I don't think you can. Maybe I'm wrong. I will probably just keep looking into this. Maybe I find some crazy unique interaction, but I just don't think don't think it is. It is it. Wait, Blade Trap, BOE. Wait, no Blade Trap. BOE Wiki Sunblast. Does this work? Okay, it does not work. Is there a replica Sunblast? There isn't. Okay. Okay. So that's the first thing. Next, we have Perforate of Bloodshed, which was already pretty good when it comes to single target. You would of course have to like swap between Perforate and some other skill, which would usually be like either Sunder, because Perforate is Slam, or just normal Perforate for the sandstands, but you'd probably just go like Sunder. And the thing is, it actually has received pretty significant buffs, because this one is 1/6, right? So it's like 15% buff. It got one more spike, so it's 20% buff. So it's two. Can we count that 35% buff? No, it's actually multiplying on another. I think it's like 25% at that point. And then this quality is actually huge. Like, just we don't have any type of modifiers like this anywhere, actually. Like, this is the big boss of bleed multipliers. And we only have it, as far as I know, on Puncture and on Lacerate. And those skills are the bleed skills specifically because of this mod. So, especially if you go for quality stacking, Perforate of Bloodshed can actually be an insanely strong single target skill. I kid you not. It can be very good, especially with Crimson Dance, because of how easy it is to overstack the bleeds because of how many spikes you create. And then Summon Reaper, I'm not a minion guy. I don't know how good this is. This does look good, the aggravate, because you probably most of the time have problems with it. Even though you would usually just run like random arrows and you get the bloodletting on the passive skill tree and you like almost instantly aggravate it. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. It's probably better than this, but I'm just not sure how good this actually is, like in a vacuum if we ignore the previous one. So yeah. The other thing that changed was Glad triple block. Nobody knew about it. I mean, probably people knew about it. I didn't know. Other people I talked to didn't know. I've never played like one-handed block Glad, so I didn't really have the chance to feel it. Pretty much deserved. Like, Glad was like 50% tankier than it should have been. I suppose that's 50%, but it like has like a very what's called like scaling effect. I forgot the word. Like it scales progressively out of control, so that's fair. And the other big thing is the weapon thing, right? So now on weapons, we cannot roll resistances, and with multiple attribute requirements, we'll roll attributes with lower chance, which is good for two-handed weapons. Then the leech has been moved. Where is it? Okay, so wait, where's the leech? Am I stupid? But yeah, basically the leech has been moved to suffix, which is really nice for augmenting the third fizz mod on your axe, like mid to late game type of crafting. It really simplifies, especially like alteration orbing the regal recipe, and you can actually roll for many of those, because I would usually just craft one regal axe, but now you can do many of them, and you have way higher odds of actually hitting attack speed on your regal or augment because of that. Even though you can still like hit leech, which kind of fucks that, but it's still very nice, or like hybrid fizz. So that's very good. But this is mostly what comes to direct and direct change to bleed. So then there's the tier list I made. I customly made all the pictures, right? I think I'm missing one. Yeah, they're back. Okay, fixed. So I'm gonna do it live. Like right now, I don't have it pre-planned. I pretty much know the tier list and what are the best ones, and we'll go from the best ones to the worst ones, because it's probably going to be easier than just like sorting from left to right, at least for me. So I'm going to explain what I define as S tier so they understand what is the best bleed build to like base your expectations off of, right? So best bleed build is 1, league startable, 2, is not only for map clear, but it can also kill bosses for the progression, 4 stones, the new bosses, right? It is not dependent on uniques or specific items. Like, for example, there's one-handed Leap Slam Glad here, which is dependent on Replica Stampede that gives you more damage and movement skills because you're using Leap Slam of Groundbreaking, I think that's how it's called. And it has like some insane damage scaling for basically no money. But since you can get unique and it might get expensive because of some outer builds using it, it's hard to acquire. So that's why this build would be like S tier, but otherwise it's like B tier. And the third thing is that it can scale very, very far on reasonable investment. Because, for example, right, you can scale SST bleed to like 15 million, maybe even 20 million, right? But you need actually merit tier gear for that. Like, who in their own like same mind are gonna be like, okay, I want to throw shields and deal 10 times less damage than cold SST? Nobody would. Which is why SST is also only an A tier, mostly because of the fact that it cannot kill bosses, because it doesn't need scaling. It's just like a very, very nice mapper. Even though I do consider this build shit, it's very straightforward, and I do think that has an advantage similar to RF. So with that out of the way, where we established what is S tier, I'm just gonna go straight into the only two builds that are actually S tier. That's two-handed Chieftain Slam. I have Sunder here, but you can also use Ground Slam of Earthshaking. It really is a preference. I do prefer Sunder, which is why I put Sunder in most builds, but wherever you see Sunder, you can actually use Ground Slam. So why is it good? You have free res, you have max res, your work rep I was insane, especially if you're fine with pressing it manually, and you have free 7th link. So you have early game, right? You can league start it from just Sunder on hit, then going into bleed, and then fully transferring into bleed, and you have like every node is strong, it scales you really well. You have many defensive options, offensive options, you can respec into other things. Absolute S tier without a doubt. Like an S tier, it's Juggernaut with Boneshatter of Complex Trauma. It is better to follow Soul for that. He's a pretty fleshed out character. It is obviously hardcore skewed, so you can like take off some defensive nodes, because I was looking at his POB for Forgestone, and he had like Cloth and Chain, which is the max all elemental resistance one with Mastery taken, which is understandable but not necessary on softcore, or the starting life nodes of the Marauder, which can also be dropped for damage or for strength nodes. So it is a very solid build. It uses volatility and ruthless, so instead of going for low amount of hits but strong, he goes for like spamming hits, and then eventually when you overstack enough and you aggravate, you deal insane damage, and POB will not actually represent that type of damage because it calculates the average, and as you might know, there's three types of lies. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and average being part of statistics, which is bullshit. So yeah, these are the two S tier builds. None of the others I consider S tier for reasons I will explain as we go. So now with A tier, there's not that many A tier builds, and I'll start with my personal favorite, which is two-handed Bleed Glad Sunder. I do acknowledge that it's not the best, which I feel like is probably the best like proof of my unbiasedness, because I hate those two builds. I truly do. Them not having aggravate just feels terrible to me whenever I try to play them, and I really dislike them. But I do acknowledge that they're objectively and factually better than what I prefer. So what is the advantage of two-handed Glad, right? You have less defenses, but you're full damage. You genuinely can have more damage than Chieftain under certain circumstances because of the Weapon Master and War of Attrition, right? Of course, War of Attrition, it's kind of a Mimi Quinn node, you know, like you can meme all you want. But even if you spend 10 seconds fighting someone, let's say a tanky rare, or doing expedition, right? All this time you're in presence of that rare, and if it's tanky, you keep getting damage while you're trying to kill it. So it's very useful, especially early on when you don't have enough damage. It really helps you ensure that you eventually end up killing that boss, that possessed boss, that tanky rare, you know, that essence, that expedition guy, all that stuff. Of course, it scales way worse because of the defensive things, but I do think that it's way better for level 100 race, for example, especially in a softcore environment, because you basically have pops, right? And you could say, oh, Chieftain also has pops. But I do think that Glad's pops are way more consistent, and you can get them online sooner and more useful in that regard, compared to Chieftain pops, where, yes, they do like explode node base of a bleed, and you don't need daily elements. But at the same time, I do think that that Glad is a better mapper, but is a worse build in general for 200 Sunder, while Chieftain is a more well-rounded one with more options. But you do have to sacrifice something for the explosions, whether it's Warcry power or max res. up to you. That's for 200 Bleed Glad, Sunder. Another one, SST. I kind of exploded. No, oh no, my god, no exploded. I'm so sleep deprived. I can't even talk. I explained why it's A tier, even though it should be B tier power wise. It's very straightforward. It's a ref like. It's very simple. There's not much to fuck up. It's only a mapper. It cannot do aspirational content. It can do like tanky stuff. It cannot really do blight. It cannot do bosses. It cannot do new bosses. So I wouldn't recommend starting specifically this league unless you're fine with not fighting the bosses. If you're fine, go for it. You can swap in Act 7. You're going to Giga Chill. You might have like 50 to 80% less damage than it's under early on, but it's going to be fine. You're going to be chilling. It's going to be very tanky, very noob friendly. Recommended if you're a casual that just does not care about bosses. So, I would say, I'm not sure about one-handed Bleed Glad Sunder with Lacerate. Like you can see, there's Lacerate here and Sunder. I really want to put it in A tier, but hear me out. The problem with this build is that Lacerate of Hemorrhage has too low AoE. It's actually counter to play it no matter how much damage it has. It actually has the highest bleed effectiveness damage, which is like 960 something %, which is just absolutely insane. It's like only rivaled by Snipe, which is, you know, incomparable for understandable reasons. But like, yeah. The problem is you need to swap between normal Lacerate and Lacerate Hemorrhage. And for normal Lacerate, when you want to deal single target damage, you need Blood and Sand. So you are forced to use Blood and Sand no matter what, and then on top of that, swap. But you could go Sunder, right? You could go with Sunder, you could go with like Ruthless, Volatility, Fist of War, something like some stupid setup like this. And sure, you could. But in League Star scenario, your damage is absolute ass. Like, when you compare ways to scale damage between two-hander and one-hander, it is just incomparable. Especially for bleed, the flat fizz matters so much compared to all other modifiers that you just lose like 70% damage. Like it's almost twice more damage for two-handed Sunder compared to one-handed Sunder. And sure, you could minimize that gap by like to like 50, 40% by using overexertion, but you still would be lacking, even though you're faster and tankier. So technically, if you get rich enough fast, you could go with one-hander, or you could go two-handed and swap in one-hander, which is what I'm planning on this league start. Because being one-handed with the Lucky Block node allows you to run maps that you would never run on two-hander, right? Like minus res, like double extra damage, you know, all that shitty stuff. You can run because of block. Because your HP is so high that if you get hit once but you don't die, you just leash it up. You just region up. And that's fine. So it is way weaker early game, but I do think that defensively it's like superior to SST. So I think I would put it over SST because it's also pretty straightforward. It's just better than SST in every like detail. And I do think that I kind of have to demote SST for that reason to be, because it's really not standing up to like these builds. Like it's actually this bad. I do think so. So I think that's actually it for A tier, because looking at these builds, I don't think there's any build that is, you know, actually maybe Slayer Boneshatter Bleed is actually up there with Sunder. It is basically the same as Chieftain or Gladiator. It just like it's just full damage, right? You have recovery to like keep it up. So it's basically more damage Jugg or faster Chieftain, but for Sunder and Boneshatter. So if you're no way, dude, no fucking way, I cannot believe it, dude. If you're that type of fan, then sure, go for Slayer. I have tried it. I really dislike the aggravate lack of aggravate, but if you're fine with that, it can actually compete with Gladiator. Even though it kind of doesn't have as much bleed supportive damage, it still does have that, you know, the speed and the free damage from culling and leech to support both your more rippy maps with Sunder and Boneshatter Trauma. I would still probably put Sunder over Boneshatter. Now that I think of it, maybe Boneshatter actually needs to be demoted to B tier. Maybe that's more of a bait than Jugg, because Jugg can just tank, but Slayer really cannot. Chieftain Boneshatter, the only reason it exists here is because of the node that gives you like Ancestral Call, because you can basically have a 7 link and you don't really need Ancestral Call in that case, and you can even manually press it if you're interested in, because of the max res it gives. But I do think it's still kind of bait. What is not bait in comparison to this build is Slayer Bleed Bow. It's actually, in fact, in my opinion, better than SST Glad, even though it's less tanky and it's more gear dependent. If you're playing on SC Trade, this build might just be the ultimate B tier bleed build. I'm sorry, GTX, no matter how good your builds are, Bleed Bow is just not it. It's hard to make it tanky, and even considering that JTX is actually trying to make his build tanky, it is not as tanky as you would probably wish for, because there's so many other builds that can do the same better in general, in specific, be more tanky, be faster mapper like bows, be tankier, literally anything, better bleed builds, all of those. But if you want specifically ranged bleed action, you don't have to go for Bleed Bow Glad, you don't have to go for Bleed SST, just go Bleed Slayer. Very well refined build, again, JTX. I'll leave a link to this channel in the description. Just follow him, it's pretty good. The items are not expensive. Even though the scaling got nerfed with Relic Cache, I think there's still plenty of ways of actually scaling it properly. And you can also start it from very early on, like play Bleed Bow, literally from the beginning. You'll be slower, and I couldn't really push the speed of that build past like 450. Like it's quite slow, and it's hard to like be fast with a mirror arrow, because the blink arrow, because you never really have any speed, and you're really lackluster on clear damage, especially before you capture bleed chance. So yeah, you might say, oh, how can you be capped on clear? Well, that's the funny thing. Bleed Bow is always capped on its clear speed rather than single target, because single target is it's always perfecto. Mi amore, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's always good on single target, and you always have to catch up clear wise, because that's the problem. Because you most of the time you just watch enemies die for like almost a second, and that's the time when you might die. So you need to take your time, especially early on. Enough ranting about that. Now we go into the territory of like questionable builds that are either hard to set up or that are unproven. So one build, like, okay, actually two builds that are proven by concept that are actually not good are, first, Bleed Bow Glad. I do think that on day one it might be better than Slayer, but in general it's way worse. I don't see any reason why would you want to play this over Slayer when you want Bleed Bow, because there's just so many better builds. Like I would even recommend playing like SST more, because you have so much more power early on, because Slayer at least provides you with some utility, right? You have Endurance Shadow Skill with Frenzy, right? You have Leech. Okay, I got ganked IRL. I don't remember what I was talking about, but basically you would rather play SST because you have a way more well-rounded beast than this, and you basically have similar damage. Oh, right, I was talking about Slayer utility. You have Leech, you have Cool, you're faster, you're more tanky, and compared to Bleed Glad, you have a fourth Ascendancy node. So, you know, guys, I'm sorry, but I mean, this is not shit. This is just shit. GGG, please add bow and staff nodes to Weapon Master. Begging. So, next build is also a proving concept. I do think that it's kind of on a similar level. It's basically like one-handed Sunder, but just worse, because you also need to solve recovery in some sort of way. It's also worse than Jugg by a lot, but it can be very tanky against mobs specifically, rather than just in general. So you don't have as much recovery because of I think it's Untiring node. I don't remember which one gives you like regen when you take physical damage, and the mitigated part just converts in regen. But yeah, this is playable, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's like very clunky. You need to like respec. You can't like start with it. You need to solve recovery. Like, especially complex trauma. Like, how the fuck do you solve recovery? Next three builds is the one I talked about. I do think that it's actually the best C tier build, because if you get those items, I will even link the build guide in the description, because there's one guy who was playing like Leap Slam of Groundbreaking and dealing actually really good damage. It's very much like RF playstyle, where you kind of have to accept that you're going to tank a lot of stuff, and being one-handed with Glad Lucky Block actually allows you to do so. But from what I've seen, and from the conversation I had with the author, not the author, but the guy who published the video, I'm not sure who like actually made it. It's that it's actually, yes, it's clunky. You have to jump into mobs, and if you can't tank stuff, you just die. And that's the problem with this build, that you can't use the range that you probably could on Sunder or like SST or Bleed Bow, if you're forced into melee. But it's really good for its price because the uniques it uses are very, very cheap, especially after like the first week. They like basically cost nothing, and you get insane damage for basically nothing. I am gonna try all of those builds this league, so maybe this tier list is gonna change by the time I'm gonna like try them out. I'm not gonna try like at least all of them. I'm gonna try like all these archetypes, right? I'm gonna try the non-great Sunder, non-great Boneshatter, and I'm gonna like see how it goes. I'm gonna make like a conclusion based on what I know of Jugg, Slayer, and Chieftain, and just say not great sucks, but I think Juggernaut does better this, Slayer does better this, Chieftain is unplayable, or something like that, right? So the other two builds, I'm gonna automatically put them in D tier, even though I do genuinely think that they might end up in B tier or even A tier. So those builds are Perforate Chieftain and Perforate Gladiator, specifically of Bloodshed, because the damage effectiveness that you can have with the skill now, especially as I said with quality scaling, when you're going Crimson Dance, is nuts. Of course, it's going to be two different setups. Why Chieftain, you might ask? I could put Slayer, but I do think that Slayer is kind of lackluster in that regard because he doesn't really offer anything of value for the Perforate specifically. Sure, you have AoE, but it doesn't affect your damage. And maybe I should have added Slayer, actually, now that I think of it, but whatever. So with Chieftain, you would go Overexertion, you would go all the war cries when intimidating, and you would go for Slam, Fist of War, so that since you create 6 spikes, all those spikes bleed, and you overstack the bleed by 4. And so you flick like bleed many, many times, and then you aggravate it, you keep hitting, and you keep inflicting very strong bleeds because even though you run out of intimidating cry exertions, you still have the exertions of all your other cries. So it can be really good for single target. Of course, it has a caveat of having to swap, but I do think it can be actually good with the buffs. And especially if you go like Volatility Vislata and you use the Mercs with the, I don't remember the name of that guy, like the toe, which gives you lucky damage. This build can actually fucking fry. Like I'm not even kidding. Like on paper, this could be absolutely massive. And you can swap with Sunder, by the way, because it uses the same links. It's a slam. Like you just swap in with Sunder, you swap with Sunder, and you're like, oh Maven, hello. Oh my god. You know, type shit. So yeah. With Gladiator, on the other hand, what you would do is going Volatility Ruthless, because you're kind of incentivized to like hit often. Of course, you could also go for the overexertion setup, but I do think that Chieftain in that regard has an edge, and you would rather on Gladiator to maybe go one-hander or go like for attack speed, where you hit many, many times and try to roll for a good one. While on Chieftain, since you have a free access to Fist of War, you would rather just, you know, hit hard, then aggravate, and then watch the enemies die. So that's it for tier list, I think. I might have forgotten something. If I've forgotten something, I'm going to edit it in after this. But let's move on to the next topic. So next topic is kind of like getting its roots out of this one, is what builds to league start and not to league start. So again, we're on this page. I'm just going to talk about every single build of the, like every single build, which is like, I'm going to rate them on league startability, like in my opinion, right? So all of the builds that are final league start are going to be A. Best league starters are going to be S. And questionable are going to be B or below, depending on their questionability. So I do think that it's like this. And I genuinely think that it might be like this. And that the worst one is the Glad. And that, okay, let me order actually. Start. Again, with the caveat, SST with the caveat that you're not going to be interested in killing bosses. Yeah, I think this is it. Actually, maybe I need to swap these. Yeah, like this. So this is the league startability tier list, in my opinion. Those three are obvious kings, like there's no doubt. Even though I put Bleed Glad Sunder initially in the A tier, I do think it is better. I do think that 100 is worse because it's harder to push content, especially when you get upgrades. It's just misery. Every single person I talked about it to, they really disliked it. And I do agree because the numbers actually represent what they're reporting. And I'm not really willing to try it myself because if both numbers and people say the same thing, I have no reason to not trust that. Even though I'm actually better at Glad, I saw their POBs, looked at characters, fetched the characters. I tried different setups. It just doesn't work. Even like surviving till Jugg the Axe, and even with it, nah. So yeah, that's very quick part of League startability of builds. And the last thing are some general thoughts on the direction in which Blue is moving. So I really like, I probably expressed in one of my previous videos, how GGG are adding SSF viable support for Bleed, even though it kinda makes some unique items obsolete, like a Salem or Vislata. Even though Vislata is still usable, Volatility and Snipe Gem are actually making Bleed better SSF viable. And they're kind of doing something similar, but on a more general scale with like transfigured gems, like the trap of laceration, right? Which is careful, but they're careful with buffing. Maybe we just don't know something, right? With the bloodshed, with the hemorrhage, and the fact that slams didn't get nerfed is a big W for Bleed because I was really afraid that slams are so strong that Bleed is gonna get collateral nerfed, but thank God it didn't. So there's many things they're actually doing, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that is moving Bleed in the right direction of being that constantly good on the radar type archetype, but never problematic. Because they know how problematic can Bleed be and how superior to every single build it can be because of how, like, again, superior the application of it and the function of Bleed is compared to Ignite or Poison or other dots. And so I think they're very close, and it's probably very hard for them to make any more drastic decisions as to move Bleed, because it's very easy for, like, at the very moment to overstep that line where Bleed becomes OP again and have to nerf, and it's like constant back and forth, which you very likely don't want to end up in. Which is why I do think that Bleed just needs like mostly quality of life changes and just some small pivots in the ideas of how Bleed should work. Like, for example, the main ideas that I would pitch for Bleed, right? So Aggravate made it very globalized, which is nice, but I do think that Crimson Dance needs to be brought back. And as a general thing, it shouldn't be only a Glad thing, because mostly, like Crimson Dance, is probably mostly used by Glads. Sure, it can be easily used by others, but you really need like Bleach chance, and there's so much you need to invest, and like you basically only benefit it from playing Bleed because other ascendancies don't reward you for staying in battle for long, which is what Crimson Dance is. Except for maybe Juggernaut, but you're still better with just aggravating because of how bad Crimson Dance is at every moment. The second thing I would think is a very important one is Rupture. So Rupture is a very cool idea as a thing where you support your Bleed in a certain way, just like you would do Aggravate. But I genuinely think that the problem with GGG's approach to Rupture is that you cannot, I repeat, you cannot go crit on Bleed. You just cannot. You don't have enough points. It's like going, I don't know, it's like going aura nodes on melee. Like, you know that melee mode from 7TV where there's like 133 points out of 123? Like, this is literally Bleed moment, but combined with Bleed and melee. It's just so atrocious, except when you play like SST or Bleed Bow, but those are two shit, so we just don't care, right? Just please, stop trying to make Bleed work with crit. It just doesn't work. It doesn't doesn't work with Perfect Agony. The new wheel, it doesn't work. Everybody but Bleed builds uses it. Nobody uses Rupture. I was thinking about supports, but it's so hard to to set up a support that uses Rupture to help you. It's possible, but it's hard. Needs a lot of gear. Like, just please, just make Rupture like a Crimson Dance thing, or make it so that your aggravate chance is converted to Rupture chance, right? Make a unique item. Make a support gem that like just change the support gem from crit to actually converting like the aggravate chance, or add the ensnaring arrow back so that the bleed bow has an option between ensnaring arrow and aggravate, because being forced into aggravate is very cringe. So you can have both ensnaring arrow and that. You'll have Rupture for Crimson Dance, and you might not have to buff Crimson Dance at all, or maybe just a little bit. You know, there's so many like small things you can change, or like gratuitous violence, right? Like poison and bleed have this problem where they don't interact with on-kill explosions as the other skills do, like ignite or other stuff. So it would be really nice if we could have gratuitous violence, even if we overkill. I understand it's a calculation problem, but I do think there are ways that it could fix this calculation problem without fucking up the whole system, where you bleed pop, even if you have too much hit damage and you overkill the enemy. And what was even the third thing? Oh, the third thing was make Gladiator the versatility expert he strives to be. Like, the Weapon Master is an example of how he can be versatile in many things. I do think that the Axe node is pretty good, but the other ones are quite questionable, so they would likely need buffs, numerical ones, not big ones, or they would need to provide something more serious. So instead of just being, numerical buffs like accuracy, crit multi, make them do something unique. Make wielding a dagger convert crit multi into certain bleed duration. Make wielding a sword increase your attack speed per recent bleed inflicted. Make a staff for each time you blocked recently, you get damage over time multiplier. With bows, make it so that, I don't know, bleed duration is converted into bleed multiple. Okay, maybe I'm like repeating myself, but you get the idea. Like, add something more interesting, build enabling, that would make Gladiator either just this versatility guy with dual wield, where you actually want to dual wield, not just bleed, or just make him the full bleed one trick that this class actually seems to be throughout the years, where you would rather play non-bleed than anything else but Glad, and Glad is the bleed guy. They really have to commit to this one idea, whether only bleed or the versatility guy, and make him both bleed and something else. But they're very choked on, the nodes that they have. They've only the Weapon Master to change, I think. And they could combine gratuitous violence with the other node. I don't remember how it's called, but yeah, the aggravate one. So those are the main things that I think like bleed and Glad and bleed in general need, that will bring bleed to actually being on the radar but not too OP. Like, playable enough but not too playable, if you know what I mean. So those are my general direction thoughts. I might make an entirely different video discussing the problems that bleed has and how to fix them and possible solutions. The other thing that was on my mind is that, you know how in Path of Exile 2, Pathfinder has a bleeding concoction? Why doesn't our Pathfinder, or why don't we have a bleeding concoction? Or, for example, why don't we have a boiling blood from Alchemist Mark? We have Poison Ground, we have Burning Ground. Why not boiling blood? It'd be so nice. And you could also make it work only for non-slams. You could make it so that if you have inflicted a certain amount of bleeds, the latest bleed inflicts the thing, so that it's for spam hits. There's so many things you can change, and I do think if they change it, we're actually gonna be living in the best bleed era ever. But now that's definitely about it. So now about the POB, about the league starter I was mentioning. So I made this neat POB, gonna be again in the description. It is basically my league start plan. It has leveling from Brutus Part to the level 93 with the Veiled Orbax. It has not very extensive, but pretty extensive notes explaining like my leveling. Like I'm gonna read it out. Since all I care about is getting to functional state of bleed ASAP, I'm dirty meta abuser and I'm going to play Econ until end of Act 7. Feel free to level any way you like, whether it's Helix, Sunder, or bleed in any shape or form as soon as you want. So here I explain how I'm going to level with Econ and how I found to make it the most comfortable, which for example nobody uses from what I see in Poacher's Mark. It's very nice until you swap to Econ for sustain because you run out of mana flask and you don't need to TP out, which I find really nice for the small damage sacrifice that it actually makes you have. It describes the things you need to look for. From now on, you'll have to keep a close eye on the amount of armor gear you have, because you'll get blasted otherwise due to no D-term. Also start paying attention to armor base for armor 4 links for your respec Act 1. If you get all in advance, then your swap will be smooth. Then the swap with all the gems, the links, the preferences, like will be possible because of the socket pressure. Then the playstyle, your rotation for tanky rares or bosses, like all the things here, even with tinctures, the endgame details, such as why deadly elements is a thing, that you need a leech node, that you can make a T16 viable axe just with a regal, a few granite flask, and augmentation, just get an insane axe with 550 PDPS, I think. And why actually crafting highest phase is better than crafting the veiled phase, both cost-wise and effectiveness-wise. What's the difference between exertion and cruelty, and why you have to use exertion on two-handed Sunder, because it's just 50% more damage over cruelty. Like, there's no reason to not use it. The difference between cruelty and deadly elements is the same, just the deadly elements affects your hits and it helps with pops, and cruelty makes your pops worse because it overkills. That your bleed duration should be over under 3 seconds because it starts feeling bad. Even though you hit rarely, it still feels terrible. There's the tree. There's this weird leech node, which helps with sustain before Death Rush, which I'm going to be using. I'm going to drop it. Even though I have urgent orders in my 6-link setup on the weapon, I do still have Admonisher, which is a sign that until you get to your 6-link in urgent orders, or even a 5-link, it's still better to use Admonisher, especially since it gives you increased damage. You can see it's 8% damage because of all of the work guys used. I'm stuttering so hard because of sleep deprivation. Whew. Okay. Fortify, you get more damage from going for Fortify than for having a gem and spending those points elsewhere. I'm going for Max Res because you really have suppression, and getting suppression is hard and ineffective, in my opinion. So it's better to go Max Res when doing charge and stamina and just like take it and just like be fine with it. Proccing the Fizz Mastery with no Right, but before that I'm taking the Mastery for skills called Life instead of mana. I did not have the Life Mastery, right? Because it really depends on what armor you have. You should really base it off. You shouldn't be like, oh, I should only take the armor without life. Because after a certain point, especially with the latest additions to the life modifiers, you can have more life with a high roll of life rather than with mastery. So it really depends for your setup. I have Max Res on Armor Mastery because I'm going to use all armor bases. There's going to be a little bit of reservation here. I have a Jewel for Leech here, which is why I can take Cannibalistic Rites instead of Spirit of War for Leech. I'm going down Reflexes here because early on, at this point, you'll probably have mixed type of gear with like evasion and stuff like that, which you would want to convert because your evasion is basically useless because of Unvarying Stance. But later on, when all of my gear is full armor, I tend to drop Iron Reflexes because you really don't need it. Even though you lose 10 dexterity, it's not a big problem because you can just de-level your faster attacks a little bit right here. Boom, boom, boom. And then you can de-level Blood Rage, boom, boom, boom. And you're fitting just fine. You don't lose much. Not taking friendly charges because I have no way to sustain. Some people prefer it because of quality of life supervisory mapping. I'm not a big fan of it. Maybe if I just literally didn't know what to put it in, I would. I would expect this and this. It would look like this. I would be level 84, and I could spec into clusters. If I didn't really want clusters and I would just want to survive, I'd go butchery. I would go like these nodes. I would get some more life. I'll get the mastery. I would just get life everywhere because I'm gonna like push for 100. It's really up to your choice. You can get more jewels, right? You don't have to go for the life that I'm choosing here. You can go up here for the endurance charges because there's a nice life node, right? And there's so many things you can do. It's really up to your choice where you want damage, survivability, like all that stuff. You can go to Constitution and try to go to this wheel. You can take this wheel with these nodes with Elegant Hubris with like increased fizz damage and like faster bleeding stuff. Many things. I don't really care about covering all those setups because I'm still not sure which the setup is the best, and it really goes to you how you want to set up your character. So yeah, you can see that I'm using Jade Flask here because while I have Iron Reflexes, I really like taking Jade Flask just for the flat armor it gives me, because you can see that it's giving me 9,000 armor. Like, I'm not passing on that. I don't have Quicksilver. I'm not a big fan of Quicksilver. I have Onslaught on my boots from June. Most gear is with low amount of mods, except for the body armor, right? This body armor is an example of the type of life that you would want to have for the mastery to not work, like to not work as good. Because you can see if I take this off, right, my life is 684. Take this off, and you can see it's basically the same. So I was comparing it, and you can see that after 180 life, it gets better, more like 170, but you get the idea. So again, not too fancy of a gear. I have too much chaos res here. I forgot to decraft it, but what I usually do is in the first few days, it's only a few divines to grab a ring with Vol on hit to replace Mark of Submission. I just used int essences because I really need int, especially for enlighten later on, because in my auras you can see that I have enlighten. I have pride here, which is desactivated, because if you want to, you can go for a more damage setup with pride and determ, because you can see that my damage goes to 50.1 million, but with this setup I have 600,000 less damage. But I prefer this setup because of Herald of Purity, because they tank for me like decoy totems, quote unquote, and I have Flesh and Stone, which actually gives me a decent amount of tankiness. Like, just look at this. I ain't passing on that. And you can also see that these defenses are without Molten Shell, because if I press Molten Shell, boom, holy, I'm tanky. So yeah, it is. I think it's pretty good. Here's my Warcry setup. Here's my Link setup. I have Deadly Elements at this point to have my average damage lower than 120,000. I think that was the breaking point. You can't really like lower it after a certain scaling point, so you have to kind of have to take the L with that. But since this was overexertion, like if I just go with the average, right, and you can see the average damage is fine, because with this it goes over 120 and it's already kind of shit. But here you're very much fine. And the thing is, you don't see a leech change here, right, with the elements. But the problem is that it's leech that is maximally possible rather than leech that you get from hit. So you might get like only 50 leech from hit, but you're still maxed out on 900. That's the problem I have. So it's hypothetical, but not realistic, which is why I really want leech nodes, or at least Death Rush for recovery at this point, when I'm swapping to the elements. Otherwise, you can use Cruelty, you can use Melee Fizz. I really don't like Melee Fizz, even though I have it here. I would usually go for Melee Fizz, Cruelty, not the Cruelty, again. I would usually go like this, right? Until I swap to Deadly Elements, then I take the Fortify Mastery. But early on, I still go for Fortify because it basically provides me with more damage. So there's a lot of like things to shuffle if you're interested. You could also go for Unbound Ailments for like more bossing DPS. It makes it very comfy, and you can just like run around infinitely and even Leap Slam because you don't care about your work rise coming off cooldown, since your bleed is so expensive. So for example, right, you take Unbound Ailments, just don't look at damage, 6 seconds basically. So it almost doubles, right? Not doubles, it's like 50% more duration. So it's a big thing. I just don't have enough faster damage, which is why it doesn't seem like a big difference, but it actually is. Clusters are physical, battle hardened, master the fundamentals, breaking something. I don't remember what was it, but yeah. And then you really want to set up like jewels, because global fizz jewels are very strong for bleed. Always wear, and you can get them very cheap early on. So if you buy them early on, you can have almost biz jewels from day 1 too. Like my friend always gets flabbergasted by how I'm getting those biz jewels so early. Yeah, I don't have. Wait, do I have Enduring Cry? I don't. Yeah, so that's a mistake from me. I should have Enduring Cry. I remember where was I supposed to fit it in, but I do need an Enduring Cry specifically for boss, like sustain. So I'll try to update it and maybe somehow fit it in. Maybe I'll just drop Bladestorm MAME setup because it's kind of inconsistent and it's maybe even unnecessary if you're just mapping. It's just straight up 10% more damage. It's the best skill to proc it because you just leave it in one place and just like it attacks. And it also like gives you leech like on certain things where you kind of like reach Maven and you just put it in and you just like start dodging stuff and you're still leeching because you know. So yeah, I think that is actually it for all the bleed things. Let me actually check. Features over damage, weapon master. I don't have enemies in presence for too long. I don't have frenzy charges. That's too inflating. That's guardian. So because if I swap to normal, you can see that it instantly just like pops right back up. Again, my molten shell is not enabled. Molten shell defenses again get super inflated. So yeah, I think I actually talked about everything. Oh, the acts. So before I go to acts, explain the acts. So I explained it here how to make the acts. It's very easy, just even less alt spams than it ever was before because of the changes to the res and fizz, like fizz leech to mana and life. The build axe, well, how it would usually go is I would buy fractured hybrid, the highest one I can afford, which is preferably Sunder axe because it's actually the best by far axe, like the closest of all axe, and it's like different 20% more damage on the same like PDPS, which is actually nuts. So I would go with hybrid or I would fracture it myself sometimes. I would slap Essence of Contempt, then try to not get any prefix, lock prefix. Nowadays use Veiled Chaos Orb because it's both cheaper and you can get some good mods. Unveil Fizz, ideally Bleed Chance, because if you get 25 and you divine it, you can drop 2 bleed nodes instead of 1. So instead of doing like this, if you get it, like if you don't get it, again, but if you don't have 25%, you can actually do this and increase your damage drastically. You can just get literally like 6% more damage out of nowhere, which is a big thing. As small as it looks, like together with the axe, it actually like amounts to a decent amount of damage. And that will be your like axe until you can afford to get like a tier 2, tier 1 hybrid, then roll for flat fizz or flat either for flat fizz or like merciless or tyrannical. I think tyrannical was tier 2, right? And then augment the third fizz, which you can easily do because again leeches and suffixes now, and you get an insane axe. Or you can just like buy it from someone who like inflated the price by 3 times. Your choice. So the acts, I'm gonna abuse the respecs that we have at Bestel. Even though I'm going Ekong, like Pkong, and these nodes don't work, I'm gonna go for them initially for booters to be smoother, even though I know they're getting strength and int is actually more flexible because you can use more weapon bases and you get to Frostblink earlier, but since I'm shield charging, I don't really care about having Frostblink this early. And I'm gonna respec to the Fury Bolts, I'm gonna jump it here, and you can see that I'm a Veil. I'm taking these nodes and I'm going for int, but then as you can see, there's bosses and there's 2 swaps. Pkong swap and swap to Sunder. I don't have specifically noted Ekong swap because you'll see that I'm level 28, which is me an instantly swap. So this is my swap. I recycle at Bestel. I go into Fury Bolts because they're very good. They both give you strength, so they need to have heavy belt. Projectile speed makes it clear faster, and it's just good generic damage. Then I rush PT. You see that Oversoul. I have all the things I need. I have Point Blank, I have PT, I have some accuracy, I have Precision on, I have the Fire Mastery, which I'm using Herald of Ash to convert some of the physical damage from me being unarmed into fire so that I ignite with these nodes and I proc it. And then you can see that the Dominus, I'm already like to level 28, even higher. I go for these nodes, which makes you deal more damage close up. It kind of cancels out with these ones, but this is very much fine. I'm going for the mastery with the mastery for invert res. It's worse dispatch, I know, but I do think that it's still very, very good for single target, especially when it comes to bosses. And so as you see, I go for the mastery, and then I don't take onslaught. I know Exile and Alex are like taking it and like phasing. I really want to minimize the amount of respecs I need to do because I'm not really sure as to Give me a sec. I'm really sure about price, and I don't want to overdo it, like gold-wise, because I'm going to use the 14 respec points that I'll have, which is 12 by the time I get in Act 8, and then 2 from Act 1 from Pettit Pool. So I first respec the skills with my respec, inherit respec points from Acts, because the gold cost depends not on your level, but the amount of points you have in your skill tree. As far as I know. Maybe I'm wrong. If that's wrong, I'm just stupid. Whatever. But in case that's the case, I'm chilling. So as you can see, I'm starting to go left, preparing for the swap. There are some kind of decent nodes, and since Econk is so busted, you don't really care. I've tested it. You don't care about damage, you just overkill everything, you get 4-link and you just blast. Get a little bit of damage here, which is like your last damage to get. It's also a nice attack speed. At Kitava, I'm really going here into this part, where I'm going to get life, res, which is really good to mitigate the cruel affliction, and some more attack speed and strength. And you can see I'm getting strength, like in a lot of places, which interestingly allows me to equip full armor, like pieces, because you don't run determination at that point. You just run haste or flesh and stone plus Herald of Ash, or flesh and stone plus haste. Depending if you're fine with going here for RMR. I'm not. I'm just running like flesh and stone and Herald of Ash, so that I have to craft flat fizz on my jewelry for less pressure on my gear. You can craft flat fire. Did I say flat fizz? Yeah, I need flat fire that you can get from that side room when you're talking to Diala and Lars. No, Lars. I think it's Solaris. Yeah, in Solaris. So yeah, and you really need to get as much armor from your pieces as you can, because Grand Flask, in my opinion, is unreliable. And the runs where I did have like full armor, body armor, even with like no monster armor, I felt way better than when I didn't have it. So Togoth, I'm still on Econk. Arcali is the last boss I use Econk on, because at that point I already swapped to bleed, like beforehand, right? Even though I don't have it spec'd here. You can also just kill Arcali, get to Starting Encampment, kill Izaro, because like you can literally enter it from there. And then swap to Sunder, which is straight away. I have all my gear prepared. I'm using Labrys, and though it's slower, I'm just using Rustic Sash Recipe plus attack speed crafted ults, so that the attack speed is fine. Even though it's not prime, it's still good enough. As you can see, my main goal here is to cap my bleed chance, which I'm going here for. I'm using Admonisher for Warcrest and not feel shit. I have Leech, very important. Give the res, I take this thing, and I take the Mastery, because even though this gives a lot of damage, I really don't like the attack speed penalty. I'm going for this Mastery straight away, as you can see, which is really strong. Left side is way stronger than the right side, even though POB is currently saying that it's not. It's because of the gear. But early on, apparently, because you don't have enough multipliers, going for increased fizz generic one is actually better than going here. Later on, you'll see it all respec. Going for axe nodes, you can actually go for armor nodes. You can actually go here. I sometimes prefer to go Disciple of Unyielding, but I really found out that I'm not that in need of defense and so like yellow maps. So I'm pretty much fine, because 45 carries me in that regard, and just like plain life and resistance. As you can see, I'm starting going to the Golem's Blood. I took the Juggernaut because I usually have armor, but if you don't, you can just go straight for the Golem's Blood, because it'll give you more value, and you can take the Mastery for life, because this one is taken by skills cost, life instead of mana cost. And then you just like rush into the Disciple of the Unyielding. As you can see, you can inspect this node that I didn't inspect, but I kept it because I would eventually go up here. But if you really want to, and it really like tickles your eye, so to speak, you can do it like this. It's just that it's way better to go like this and then unspec it, just in case, but I never do it. So Kitala, this is how my tree looks. And attack speed nodes, and after that, I would inspect them into dexterity to like solve the problem of dexterity. This would be my level 75, that I would get the points. I would still use Admonisher. I would start going to Fortify, these life nodes. I'll get Slip of the Unyielding. I'll get Iron Reflexes for the more flexibility with the gear. I still have the generic fizz, because I think at level like 80 something, it starts to actually be better to take the fizz dot, which I don't, but no matter. I take the bleed mastery for damage over time multiplier for endurance charge, because you're really good sustaining them. There's the jewel socket. If you can get something good, you get there, especially mana leech, so you can spec out of this. I have it spec'd, even though I don't have jewel here, because of I assume that I get the Mana Leech Jewel. Take the Mastery. I unspec this part, specking this part for the more streamlined pathway because I'm going here anyway. I'm going for Soul Steel. Very strong node, gives you max res, also armor mastery. Time to go to the max res right here. And as you can see, I will go into the max res here because you really need damage. Your damage is very, very nice. You really don't care. I didn't cover the mastery. I think the mastery, but ascendancy. I do think that weapon mastery is more flexible than war of attrition, which is why I take war of attrition later because up until the point that you get to the Leader of Exarch, you already have the Uber Labs. You'll have all the nodes, even if you're rushing. At least that's how it was for me. You have Ward of 4 nodes because War of Attrition is way better for those long bosses, which is gonna be fine for. And this is just better for like mapping and like rares when you're like with good damage and you're killing them pretty fast. And then there's level 90. I'm starting to go for Leech because I'm like preparing for swapping to deadly elements, or even if not swapping to deadly elements. I still like the Amatophagy before Death Rush, which I might not get until like 2 divine mark because even the 2% one are quite costly, and I'm like not confident in how I'll do like currency wise, depending on what I'll decide to do, how fast I'm going, how much I'm currency making. Then there's the Regal setup. Right here, I swap the Bleach chance out, which is not the case, and Mastery swapped here. I'm actually taking the reduced speed here because at this point I'm pretty sure I'll have like a pretty good attack speed scaling with like increased like blood rage and my faster attacks being higher levels. And maybe even have an axe with faster attack speed than the Regal one, even though I have the Regal axe written here. Then there's Veil Axe, nothing much changes. I still have the Admonisher that I did on spec. That was just like for an example. Not gonna save those changes, but yeah, those are kind of the things I wanted to go over. I think that's it. Yeah, that's my league start plans. Again, no end game because I'm not sure how and if I'm gonna do it. If there's gonna be enough requests, I am going to do it, and I'm just gonna like make it and drop it into a pinned comment. So if you want an end game setup, let me know. I'll cook something up, quickly drop it in, and you'll enjoy it. So yeah, that's mostly about it. I think that's almost like an hour-long video. Might just be. I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, thanks for watching, and have a nice day. See ya.